All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us moving so that we have plenty of time to cover everything we want to talk about today. My name's Mariah. I'm the Communications and Social Media Specialist for Massachusetts Family Institute. We've got Michael King, our president, who is also here. And then we are joined by Jessica Power from Students for Life and our general counsel, Sam Whiting. And today we are just going to be covering some of the basic arguments that the abortion lobbyists like to use. Jessica is going to walk us through that, and then we'll follow that up with a brief presentation from Sam talking about your rights with free speech on campus and other places. And then we'll have a Q&A at the very end. So send your questions as they come up. I will be watching that, and then I'll go ahead and facilitate it at the end, and we'll go through as many questions as we can get to. And then I'm sure Jessica and Sam would be happy to follow up with any questions that we don't get to after the fact, and they'll provide their emails. So hoping that tonight is just going to be very informative, very practical, so you can turn around and use this in your communities. So Jessica, if you want to take us away, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mariah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Here we go. Yeah, so as Mariah mentioned, my name is Jessica Power. I'm the New England Regional Coordinator for Students for Life of America. That means I cover all of the New England states, so Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and New Hampshire. I always have to make sure I list all of my states. But what that means is I help start and maintain pro-life student groups at high schools and colleges throughout the region. And yeah, there'll definitely be some more information on how you can get started and start your own group if that's something you're interested in. But what we're going to talk about tonight is the basic pro-life arguments, really just how to stand up for your pro-life beliefs from a philosophical and scientific standpoint. So let's get started. So yes, a little bit more about me. I already shared, yes, I'm the New England Regional Coordinator for Students for Life of America. I've been involved in pro-life activism since 2018. And this was after my friend faced an unplanned pregnancy and chose life. I actually started my involvement with Students for Life of America as a student. I was the president of the University of Connecticut Students for Life group. And again, now I help pro-life students in New England start and maintain their own pro-life clubs at their high schools and colleges. So the goals of my portion of the presentation are going to be to learn how to dialogue effectively and persuasively about the pro-life issue, and again, how to use science and philosophy to defend life. So the first thing we always like to talk about when we're talking about how to defend your pro-life beliefs is, okay, how do we actually talk about the issue? And we have 4 dialogue principles here at Students for Life that we like to highlight when we're talking about how to have these conversations, these difficult conversations. So they're to listen, clarify, find common ground, and be nice. So I'll go through each one a little bit more. So listen, make sure when you're talking to somebody about the pro-life issue, especially maybe somebody who disagrees with you, you want to make sure that you're listening and not just waiting to talk. It's very easy to just be thinking of the next thing you want to say, and you want to make sure you're defending your argument correctly. So you just want to, you might be thinking, oh, I have to say this next. But what's really important is that you hear the person out and you really understand where they're coming from. Because that kind of leads into the next point, which is to clarify objections. By listening to the person and the argument that they're giving of why they maybe disagree with you, you'll be able to actually know how to respond to what they're getting at. You can ask good questions. You might ask specifically, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Or could you clarify a little bit more by what you say when maybe they say to you, okay, but what about in cases of life of the mother? Abortion, I think abortion should be legal. Maybe you ask a question to clarify objections of, okay, well, what specific cases of life of the mother are you talking about? Are you talking about ectopic pregnancy? Are you talking about miscarriage? And then you can know that you can how to answer that question a little bit better. And then the next thing you want to do is find common ground. Really, in any conversation, not just quick conversations about abortion, but especially in conversations about abortion, you want to find ways to relate to the person you're talking to. People often, their guard kind of comes down a little bit and they're more willing to talk to you when you can find things that you agree with. So that might be something as simple as saying, yeah, I also care about women. I also care, I also care about, as much as I care about the baby, I also care about the woman and her good and the fact that she's facing a difficult situation. You can say, "Yes, I understand that facing an unplanned pregnancy is hard." That is something you can say and you can agree with them on that. And that's definitely a good thing to do, is to find common ground. And lastly is just to be nice. Obviously, I think this one really is the most obvious of them all, but yeah, and goes without being said, but be kind. Loving, truthful people are always more persuasive than unloving, truthful people, which is the quote right there on the bottom. So now that we've learned a little bit about, okay, what are the principles? How do we have these conversations? It's really important to understand what abortion actually is if you're going to try to defend it. Is it really a simple procedure? The pro-abortion lobby will try to promote and say that, oh, it's just healthcare, it's just a simple procedure. Well, we're actually going to learn about what abortion is so that you can better defend your pro-life argument. So there's, as you may know, there's different types of abortion procedures that are done at different points in pregnancy, depending on when the woman goes in to have the abortion. So the first type of procedure that is done that makes up, now I believe it's up to 80% of abortions, as since the Dobbs decision happened, this has become a primary form of abortion, which is chemical abortion. This is also known as abortion pills, and this is the type of abortion that is used from up to 11 weeks. So from conception up to 11 weeks post-conception. Dangerous experimental studies have been conducted to allow women to use chemical abortion pills past that 10 or 11-week mark, which can be very, very dangerous. And just to kind of go through what actually happens during a chemical abortion is that first the woman takes the first pill. It's a two pill concoction. The woman takes the first pill at the abortion facility or at her home through death by mail. These pills are being mailed all over the country, and there's laws right now that are trying, where pro-life laws, where they're actually trying to figure out ways to prevent this from happening. But once that woman takes the pill, which is called mifepristone, it blocks progesterone, which is a female hormone, and starves the baby by removing their proper nutrition. Step 2 is 1 to 2 days after taking the first pill. The woman takes the second pill, which is misoprostol, and this forces the baby out of the woman's uterus. Bleeding and contractions can last anywhere from a few hours to several days. And then if the chemical abortion fails, she'll be told to get a surgical abortion. So the abortion industry's plan to continue ending innocent lives and hurting women includes these 3 pointers here. Easy access, having campus abortions. That's something that the abortion lobby is pushing and trying to get onto campuses throughout the country. Again, like I mentioned before, death by mail. You can just order, you can go online and meet with a telehealth doctor, and you don't even have to go in for an ultrasound to actually prove that you're pregnant, and you can get access to these abortion pills, which can be very, very dangerous. And easy access also includes removing REMS. These are the regulations that surround any drug that is approved by the FDA. When the abortion pills were originally put on the market, they actually removed a lot of these regulations to push the abortion pills through quicker. So this is very dangerous. Lessening state regulations. Like I mentioned before, no ultrasound is required via online sales, so a woman can just go online, meet with a telehealth provider, and she doesn't even have to be pregnant. She doesn't even have to prove that she's pregnant to get access to these dangerous chemical abortion pills. and the restrictions again. And then, yeah, getting into colleges and communities. The goal is to distribute them through all college health centers and local pharmacies. So your role is to be a friend and a support system. Chemical abortion is only becoming more common. Like I mentioned, that percentage is up to 80% in some places. Some states don't have reporting laws, so you can't totally tell how many abortions are happening. But chemical abortion is what is most common because it's what is done during the first trimester. So sharing pregnancy help resources can help save the lives and prevent chemical abortions from happening in the first place. This is something I recommend that you take a picture of. This is the abortion pill reversal hotline. So something good to know is if the woman takes the first pill and then decides she doesn't want to go through with the abortion, she regrets taking the pill, she has up to about 72 hours to actually reverse the abortion if she takes the abortion pill reversal pill. So this is the national hotline, and if you call this number, it would connect you with like a local provider that would be able to provide the abortion pill reversal pill. So I would just recommend taking a picture of this. Just, you never know. I mean, a fifth of my generation has been lost to abortion, so it's very likely that you might have a woman in your life who is considering abortion or could have taken the first chemical abortion pill. So just definitely a really good number to know about. So then the next type of abortions are vacuum abortions, also known as aspiration suction. This is what's done from 7 to 13 weeks. Step 1 is a suction catheter or a handheld syringe, sucks the baby out of the uterus. And step 2 is a curette, is used to scrape out any remains. There's also dilation and curettage, which is also known as D&C. This is when a curette is used to scrape the uterine walls, and parts are removed piece by piece. Something important to note about this procedure is this is also the procedure that is done in some miscarriages. So sometimes when when a child unfortunately dies due to miscarriage, this is the procedure that is sometimes done to get rid of the remains of that pregnancy. Sometimes the pro-abortion lobby will try to confuse these things and say that miscarriage is the same as abortion because they both use this procedure of dilation and curettage. However, this is not true. We know that miscarriage is not the same as an abortion because miscarriage is the natural ending of a child's life and abortion is the purposeful ending of a child's life. So the intent is very different. So it's something to keep in mind. Miscarriage is also medically called a spontaneous abortion. So sometimes because of the medical language, people are like, oh, well, miscarriage is an abortion. No, that's not true. And yeah, I just want to make that very clear here. There's also no pro-life law throughout the country that prohibits an abortion restriction law that prohibits care for miscarriage. That's something else to know about and I would like to make clear. So the next procedure is dilation and evacuation. This is what's done between 13 and 24 weeks. Step 1 is the abortionist dilates the cervix, and then step 2 is when forceps are used to pull the baby apart, and the skull is crushed before removal. And science has proven that baby can feel pain by as early as 12 weeks. So when this procedure is done, when this abortion is done, the baby can actually feel it. Saline abortion used to be done at 12 plus weeks. Saline solution was injected into the amniotic fluid, and then the baby swallowed the fluid and their skin burned, causing them to painfully die. This procedure is actually no longer committed due to the fact that numerous babies actually survived after the abortionist tried to perform a saline abortion on them. There's actually people out there that are living and are here today that survived saline abortions. So because the abortionists weren't succeeding, they decided to get rid of this method. And then there's heart attack abortion. This is what's done at 26 plus weeks, and dioxin is injected to cause a fetal heart attack. And then 3 to 4 days later, the woman delivers a dead baby. Um, this is an example of a late-term abortion. Late-term abortions do happen. There are more than 11,000 late-term abortions committed annually in the US. So if anybody ever tells you late-term abortions don't happen, that yes, they do. This is what's done. So, all right. So now that you understand what abortion is, I want to go a little bit more into how do we defend life? How do we stick up for the fact that obviously these procedures are awful? So the pro-life position and the position that Students for Life uses is a structured defense using both science and philosophy. So the first thing we need to do when talking about this issue is we need to understand what are the preborn children, because if abortion isn't about preborn children and the ending of a human life, then it's just a normal procedure. It's just a healthcare procedure. But if it is the ending of a human life, then that's why we actually have to care about it. So preborn children, they are distinct, they're living, they're whole, and they're human. They're a new entity, they're alive, they are complete, and they're human. And that we know that human life has value. So we also need to understand, when does human life begin? So basically, that's at fertilization. It's when the cell results from fertilization of an oocyte and a sperm at the beginning, and that's the beginning of a human being. So we need to know that human life begins at fertilization. So I want you to think about a Polaroid camera and a Polaroid picture. Hopefully everyone on this call knows what a Polaroid camera and picture is. But um, this is an example of Polaroid picture and basically and camera. And when you take a picture on a Polaroid camera, the picture doesn't show up right away. Right? You know what you took a picture of, but the picture doesn't show up right away. Usually takes a little while. It takes a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, for the picture to be as dark as it is in this photo. But you know from the moment you take that picture that it is a picture. And this can be used as an analogy for a human being. We know that from the moment of conception, a preborn child is human. They might not be fully developed yet, just like the picture, but they have human DNA, they have human parents, they have all the things that they need to grow into an adult. And they're just not fully developed yet, just like the picture isn't fully developed yet. But from that moment, they have everything that they need to become a full adult and to develop into a full adult. And truthfully, you're not fully developed. Well, okay, a picture develops in 5 minutes. You're not fully developed as a human being, as a person until about your early 20s, early to mid 20s. The male brain is actually doesn't fully develop until age 25. So therefore, you could say that human beings that are born and are walking alive aren't even fully developed yet. So this is a really good analogy to use when talking to people, is the Polaroid picture analogy. So something non-human doesn't become human by getting older and bigger. Whatever human is human from the beginning. So this is just something good to remember. I'd also recommend taking a picture of this slide. This is just like some basic apologetics, basic arguments to just remember when you're talking about this issue. This is by Justice for All. They're a great pro-life apologetics organization, nonprofit organization that I would definitely recommend looking more into. But it's called the 10-second apologist. So there's 3 things to remember. If you don't remember anything else, this is important to remember. So first, if a preborn child is growing, aren't they alive? And if they have human parents, aren't they human? And if living humans like you and me have human rights, then why don't they? So again, Maybe they're small. Maybe the preborn child is tiny, okay? But they're growing and they have human DNA and they have human parents. And therefore they should have human rights. There is no philosophical difference between the adult that you are now and the embryo that you once were that justify killing you. Okay, so you might be asking, all right, well, maybe you've gotten this argument before. It's a human, but it's not a person. Sometimes people will say, okay, well, to be a person, it has to be human and something else. Okay. Well, the only thing that gives us our value is our humanity. This is the one thing that we have in common. We might have different skin color, we might be, have different heritage or different nationality, be from different places, but we're all human. And that's the one thing that we have in common. We are all equally human and therefore we are equally valuable. So in the past, okay, so say, okay, that argument, all right, you need to be a person. To be a person, you have to be human and something else. In the past, when we have said that to be a person, you have to be human and something else, there's been terrible things that have happened. These have been terrible situations, right? And you can just look on the screen and think of these, right? Slavery. Okay, you had to be human and white. Oppression to be a person. For the oppression of women, right? You had to be human and a man to be a person. Child labor. You have to be human and an adult to be a person. And you can go on with all these other instances. So truly, the only thing that gives us our value, that the only thing that we all have in common is our humanity. And that is why the abortion is the human rights issue of our day, because it's just like all these other things that have happened in the past that are awful. Okay, so then what about her circumstances? Sometimes you get that question. Okay, the woman's in poverty. She's been, she wants to pursue her career. She doesn't have support. What does she do now? That's why she should have an abortion. First, in those situations, you want to listen to understand. We're going back to those dialogue principles from the beginning. Yeah, ask clarifying questions and listen to their view. Don't just wait to respond. And it's okay if there's awkward pauses. Sometimes that happens. Just don't interrupt. Let the person completely say everything that they have to say before you respond. 2, acknowledge the difficulties. Don't skip this step. People, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you actually care. And this girl's holding a poster, we love you both. You can, like I said before, you can acknowledge that, we do love the woman. And then, we do understand that this is really hard, that it's really hard to face an unexpected pregnancy. And you can acknowledge that and find that common ground there. Then, yes, build genuine common ground. Don't compromise it doesn't compromise your position. And you can point that out. But it shows that you're not weird and that you're human too. And this can just be finding simple ways to just build common ground again. To say, I do care about the woman. Or even sometimes if you're having a conversation with somebody you don't know, maybe just try to find something that you have in common with them. I know sometimes when we're on campus, we'll ask people, what's your major? See if you have something in common there. It helps build rapport when you're talking to people. And then number 4 is to trot out the toddler. So you want to create a parallel example with a toddler and ask, can we kill the child in this situation? So just to go quickly through this. So say somebody says, okay, well, the woman, okay, well, this woman she's poor and she is facing a situation of this difficult situation of an unexpected pregnancy. She has no money and she has no place to live, and somebody says this to you. So then you kind of want to bring up the example and agree, okay, well, yes, I understand that this is difficult. But you want to create a parallel example with a toddler. So you might want to say, okay, well, say that woman has a 3-year-old son. She's facing an unexpected pregnancy, but she also has a 3-year-old son. Can she just kill her son? her 3-year-old son in this situation just because she's poor and facing poverty in a difficult situation. And of course they'll probably say, no, of course not. That's murder." And then that's when you can kind of get into what we talked about before about acknowledging the humanity of both the child and the 3-year-old child and the preborn child. And you can find more information. I'm going to share some more resources at the end that will help with trotting, that can dig a little bit deeper into trotting out the toddler. And then address her real needs. So why does she feel like she needs an abortion? Maybe again, maybe it's because she's poor. Maybe she needs a place to live. Maybe she wants to go to college and she doesn't know how she's going to pursue her education if she has goes through with this pregnancy. Often, and pregnancy resource centers will tell you this as well, often women who are facing abortion, facing that decision of whether they're going to have an abortion or not, it's because they're just freaking out. And that's the immediate, abortion feels like the immediate solution to the difficult situation that they're facing. But we know that abortion is never the solution. But often, sometimes they just need help with all those other things. Okay, maybe they need to get out of a difficult relationship, or maybe they need some financial resources. You want to address those needs first, and then you can talk about the pregnancy, and then you can talk about that. But sometimes, really, those are usually the pressing things, and abortion just feels like an easy escape. And then, in cases of rape, um, obviously, this is a very difficult topic to talk about. And usually I know that when I talk about this issue, people usually jump to that right away. Okay, what about in cases of rape? So you want your response to this to be a 90% relational response and only 10% intellectual. Sometimes it's easy to jump to statistics and just be like, oh, well, only 1% of abortions are a result of pregnancy from rape. Okay, well, that's not usually the most compassionate way to answer this. Usually what I do is I will just really affirm the person that I think sexual assault is awful and that I believe that a perpetrator should be penalized, penalized to the full extent of the law. Um, and I really just think that we should even increase our laws in some places to just that rape's really awful and that we should really, yeah, that person should be criminalized. And just you really want to emphasize how bad rape is and how much you think that person that justice should be given. Um, and then after you do that, then you kind of just want to talk about the fact that obviously sexual assault is traumatizing to a woman, and that woman should be treated with the utmost care and respect after that, and that she should get counseling and she should be surrounded by people who love her and have all that support. Um, and that because rape is traumatizing, but you also want to emphasize the fact that abortion is also traumatizing. So abortion is not the solution to a pregnancy from rape, because that is just going to kind of compound the trauma that the woman is already facing. So that's kind of how I typically answer that question. But again, you just really want to focus on the fact that rape is awful, because we all know that sexual assault and rape is awful, and you really want to emphasize that, but also emphasize the fact that abortion is traumatizing, just like sexual assault is traumatizing. So is abortion, and that's really not the solution for the woman. Counseling and support and being there for her is the solution. Right, I'm just going to skip through some slides here. But really, our friends are missing. And that's, like I said, 1/5 of my generation is gone because of abortion. And that's why we need to stick up for our friends that are missing in our classrooms. Here are some examples of some more apologetics. If you guys are interested in going deeper into these topics and learning more about how to defend life, I would definitely take a picture of this slide. I mentioned some of these before. I have a question slide, but I'll just skip to this real quick. Yeah, so if you got stuff out of that and you want to continue your pro-life activism, join the pro-life movement, start a Students for Life group at your school. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I help start and maintain these pro-life groups on high school and college campuses throughout New England. So I will help you walk step by step of how to start your group if your school doesn't have one. So there are over 1,500 student pro-life groups throughout the country. There's 62 groups in New England. Several are also at Christian high schools, if you go to a Christian high school. And our groups participate in the 5 pillars of pro-life activism. These include effective education, industry impact, public policy, rapid response, and supportive services. And we can go more into that a little bit, but these are just different areas of pro-life activism and ways that you can get involved. Just some example of some things that your group can do if you decide to start a group. You can pray outside of Planned Parenthood and offer life-affirming resources. You could host a fundraiser for a local pregnancy resource center. This is actually a picture of me in college. This is what my group did at the University of Connecticut. And you can also attend a local March for Life. And there's plenty more you can do. These are just examples. So how do you start a group? Well, you can email start@studentsforlife.org at any time to start your group, and we'll definitely get you connected and walk you through every step of the way. And you can also just feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, send me an email with any questions about how to start a group, or if you have even a little an inkling of desire to start. I would love to hear from you. And if you do have any questions from my presentation today as well, I'd be happy to help them to answer them. And then lastly, just some regional announcements of some upcoming events happening in New England. So on Tuesday, February 11th at 7 p.m., Massachusetts Citizens for Life Young Adult Chapter is actually going to be hosting Dr. Michael New. He's a political scientist and statistician that studies abortion. And yeah, he's going to be sharing some really awesome statistics and new research on the pro-life movement and how pro-life laws have affected just the landscape of the abortion issue here in the United States. So that's going to be super cool. And then Wednesday, March 19th at 12 p.m. at the Connecticut State Capitol is the Connecticut March for Life, if anyone would like to come to that. And again, there's my contact if you'd like to reach out. And follow me on Instagram. That's the main Students for Life account, and also New England_SFLA is my Instagram. All right.
All right, thank you, Jessica. That was great.
Yes.
Again, just a reminder, if you guys have any questions, make sure to send them in the chat, and then at the end of this, we'll go all over that. You can send as you go. So just wanted to remind everyone of that. But now I'm going to turn it over to MFI's General Counsel, Sam Whiting, who's going to take all that great practical information that Jessica just gave to us and break it down. Because we know you often get pushback in these situations when you try to exercise your free speech on campus. So Sam is going to talk about your rights and what you can do in those situations. So Sam, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And let me just get this set up. Does that look all right? Great. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much again, Jessica, for partnering with us on this, and I'm really happy to be here. Students for Life is such a great organization. When I was in college, I was part of our, campus pro-life group, and those things that you mentioned at the end there, praying outside Planned Parenthood and raising funds for PRCs and going to the March for Life. We did all that. And that was just great, tangible, practical experience and just being, engaging in some activism and standing up for life. So that I think that really helped lay a foundation for me and what I'm doing now. And so I think it's so important and for students to be engaged on these issues. So hopefully this presentation tonight is useful for all the students who are watching. So for my portion, as Mariah said, I want to go through what I'm going to be focusing on is free speech. So I'm a constitutional law attorney here in Massachusetts, and so I'll bring you through basically the rights that you should know as a pro-life advocate and as a student on campus.
Sam, so sorry to interrupt. We're looking at the presenter view of your slides.
Oh, that's weird.
Wanna
Okay,
flip that around.
let's fix that. Let's try this.
There
Is that
you go.
better?
Yeah, all good now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we'll start with just some First Amendment basics. So as you all probably know, the First Amendment protects a number of rights. There's actually 5 separate rights in here, but the big one that I think everybody knows is freedom of speech. So the First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So, this is one of our most cherished rights in America, as you all know. One thing that people may not know is that the First Amendment typically requires state action. And so what that means is that if your neighbor tries to censor you for saying something, or if Facebook kicks you off of Facebook because they don't like what you're saying, typically you're not going to be able to go and sue them under the First Amendment. It has to be a government entity. But for those of you at public universities, especially, or public high schools, if we have any high school students on this call, um, those public institutions are state actors, and so the First Amendment applies to them, and they have to follow the First Amendment. So if you go to a private university or a private school and you're on this call tonight, some of what I'm saying won't necessarily be applicable to you, but I will say there are other ways that you can also have your free speech protected in certain situations. Sometimes if a school censors you, it's actually violating the contract that they have with you as a student because you're paying them money to be there. And then in other circumstances, they may actually be violating Massachusetts law, or the law of the state that you're in. So if people have questions about that, happy to answer those. So I have a few slides here where I'm just going to talk about free speech on campus. And again, this is mainly applicable to public university campuses and public schools. But I think it's good information that everybody should know. So the first aspect of free speech on campus is group approval. I think that's a good place to start with this because obviously if you can't get your group up and approved, then you're probably not going to be engaging in a lot of other free speech. So the main takeaway that I want people to get from this slide is that schools can't deny approval or equal funding to a group because of their message or religious beliefs. So just because you're pro-life, or just because you're Christian, or just because you have stances on other issues that people don't like or that your school administrators don't like, doesn't mean that they can deny you approval or equal funding. So the case that I have cited here, Rosenberger versus Rector, of the and visitors of the University of Virginia. This was a 1995 case where the University of Virginia tried to defund a Christian student newspaper on campus because they felt like because it was religious, they'd be violating the separation of church and state. And what the Supreme Court said was, you can't do that. This is a student newspaper. It's not a newspaper from the school. So you're not endorsing religion, and you can't defund something just because of a religious perspective. So that applies to student groups as well. Just because of your perspective, just because the school might not endorse that perspective doesn't mean that they can deny you access. Another thing that I think is really important for pro-life groups is access to campus spaces. So the basic takeaway here is that the First Amendment requires student groups to receive equal access to campus spaces regardless of their viewpoints. So that equal access piece, I think that's kind of a term that you're going to see in a lot of these slides. Basically, if your school is allowing other student groups to do something, they can't deny you the right to do that same thing because of your viewpoint, on life issues or anything else. So the kind of seminal case here is Widmar versus Vincent. This again was actually a university Christian group that wanted to book a lecture hall for a praise and worship service. And again, this public university said, well, we can't let you do that because that would violate the separation of church and state. Again, same thing. The Supreme Court said, just because you're coming with a religious viewpoint doesn't mean that you don't get to access campus spaces if those campus spaces are also accessible to other student groups to use for their own free speech. The policies that the school implements have to be viewpoint neutral. And actually, at the K through 12 level, for the high school students who might be on this call, there's even a federal statute. It's not just a constitutional provision, but there's actually a law called the Equal Access Act that mandates that if your school gives access to any student groups, any student-run clubs, they have to give equal access to every other student-run club, regardless of your religious viewpoint, regardless of, anything that you advocate for. And that means not just equal access to spaces, but equal funding, as we'll see in future slides, equal advertising, all that. So again, schools can't deny access because a group is religious. And then this last bullet point, I think, is also kind of a nuanced thing that comes up in certain situations. Schools can't charge unreasonably high security fees for events. So we've seen in situations with Students for Life or with other groups, schools say, well, you're a really controversial group, or you're bringing in a controversial speaker, you're talking on a topic that is likely to cause some sort of chaos. And so we're going to charge you $40,000 to bring in a police presence to make sure that there's not a riot on campus when you talk about pro-life issues. And that's ridiculous. That's essentially shutting down your event without saying that they're going to shut down your event. So, schools in certain circumstances can charge reasonable security fees, but they have to be reasonable and they have to be comparable to what they would charge for a similar event. They can't run you out of the school just because of your viewpoint. Advertising is another big one. So again, the principle here is equal access. If a school grants access to other student groups, to their bulletin boards, to school newspaper ads, websites, daily announcements, sidewalk chalk, all those kinds of things, those other avenues that you may want to advertise through, they have to grant your group that same access. And the case I have cited here, Flores versus Bennett, this is a more recent one out of California, Federal District Court. And this was Young Americans for Freedom group on campus there. And they had put up some flyers on a bulletin board, basically denouncing communism and advertising one of their group's events. And a bunch of students complained because I don't know, I guess they were pro-communism. And the college president sided with the complaining students and ripped down the flyers. And so these students sued, and the federal district court agreed with them that, look, this bulletin board is open to everybody else's messages. You're clearly just discriminating against these students because of their viewpoint. And even if you don't like what their flyers had to say, that doesn't mean that you get to censor them, because this is a public university campus and your bulletin board is a public forum. Another thing that we've seen, I think a little less in recent years, which is a good thing, are free speech zones. So sometimes schools will try to set up these free speech zones where basically they say, if you're going to engage in any expressive activity, if you're going to do any petitioning, anything like that, you have to do it within this, 50 by 50 foot space on campus. You can't do it anywhere else. And this is pretty clearly unconstitutional, because what the Supreme Court and other federal courts have said is that if you're going to restrict speech, especially in a public forum, or a limited public forum, even, you have to do it in in a tailored way, in a narrowly tailored way. So you can't just restrict speech across the whole campus. Maybe there's a good reason to restrict speech in certain parts of campus. Maybe you don't want people coming into a dormitory and going on some soliloquy about their favorite political issue. That would make sense. But what about on the campus quad? You can't just close the quad to speech and restrict people to a little free speech zone. So that's essentially what federal courts have ruled, is that free speech zones in almost all circumstances are unconstitutional. And what the phrase that courts have used is that schools can only impose reasonable time, place, and manner regulations on speech. So maybe during certain hours, if it's reasonable, you can't speak, or maybe in certain sensitive places or in certain ways, you can't speak. Maybe people from outside campus can't come on and distribute flyers to students on at certain times or something like that. But again, those restrictions all have to be reasonable, and typically they have to be pretty tailored to achieve an important interest on the part of the school. So this case cited up in italics is the University of Cincinnati chapter of Young Americans for Liberty versus Williams. And this was a free speech zone case where the school had designated 0.1% of campus as a free speech zone. So you could engage in all the free speech you want as long as you were in this 0.1% of campus. And the school said that's ridiculous. The court said that's ridiculous. The school can't do that. And then one of the last things here on free speech on campus is just free speech codes. So this, unlike free speech zones, this is still pretty common. You'll look through your school's student handbook and you'll see language in there potentially that says, students can't engage in any speech that is offensive or hateful or targets other students. And that kind of vague language is often weaponized by school administrators to use against student viewpoints that they don't like. One of the big cases on this is Dambro versus Central Michigan University. This is out of the Sixth Circuit, which is over in the Midwest. And they ruled in the case of this coach who had said some actually pretty terrible things, including some racial slurs, that the speech code was not enforceable and the speech code was unconstitutional. They upheld the coach's firing for other reasons, but the speech code itself was unconstitutional because it was based on the content and viewpoint of speech. And then another thing that I just want to highlight that, again, we're seeing more and more of is these bias incident reporting systems or bias incident report teams, especially on college campuses, where they have these teams that'll go around, and if somebody says anything is offensive, if somebody says anything about race or sex or gender identity, especially that that another student doesn't like, that student can go and report that to this bias incident report team, and that team will review it and often impose some kind of consequences for that student engaging in some kind of hate speech. Which, side note, hate speech is not a thing. I think a lot of people know that. I think a lot of people don't know that, but in the United States, hate speech is not a valid constitutional category of speech. There's no such thing as hateful speech. The Supreme Court has said that the greatest boast of the First Amendment is that we protect speech, even the speech that we hate. So hate speech is not a valid constitutional category, but these bias incident report teams often would disagree with that. And fortunately, courts across the country have been holding that these bias incident report systems are unconstitutional, especially if they're targeting speech based on content or viewpoint. Okay, so if you don't go to a public university, these slides will definitely apply to you. And if you do, they will as well, because these slides apply to everybody. This is talking about free speech on the street. And specifically, I wanted to touch on sidewalk counseling, because I know that that might be a thing that a lot of your groups do, which I think is great, and I would highly encourage you to do it. So sidewalk counseling or praying outside a Planned Parenthood, ministering, doing worship services, things like that. Streets and sidewalks are the quintessential public forum that allow maximum free speech. So as long as you're not doing something like blocking a public street or a public sidewalk, you almost always are going to have the right to engage in any kind of free speech activity that you want to on a public sidewalk. Now, in some states, there have been buffer zone laws. And so what that means is sometimes they'll say, within 15 feet of this abortion clinic, no one can get in this buffer zone. Actually, when I was in school in Pittsburgh, there was a buffer zone outside the Pittsburgh Planned Parenthood. I think it was like 8 feet or something. It wasn't huge, but it was a yellow semicircle drawn in front of the door where we could not walk through because they didn't want us interacting with the women, harassing the women coming into the abortion clinic. Of course, nobody ever did, but the Massachusetts law that was in place back in 2014, we had a 35-foot buffer zone law, so really restrictive. Basically, you couldn't get within, speaking distance of a woman going into an abortion clinic. That law was struck down by the Supreme Court in a case called McCullen versus Coakley. The court said that that was unreasonable. It was not a narrowly tailored time, place, and manner restriction. So in Massachusetts today, there is no buffer zone law. There's only a law that says that you can be pushed back 25 feet from an abortion clinic if you're actually engaging in some kind of harassment of a client. So a police officer would have to show up, they'd have to verify that you're harassing someone, and then they could make you stand 25 feet away. But typically, obviously that's not going to happen because everybody, certainly on this call and almost everybody in the pro-life movement is not intending to, harass women. Another thing that comes up from time to time is noise ordinances. I'm actually from Maine, and here we have this really terrible law that says that you can't make noise with the intent of disrupting procedures in a medical clinic, which on its face sounds that's reasonable, but it was passed, by the abortion lobby specifically to prevent sidewalk counselors from making noise outside of abortion clinics and doing street preaching and things like that. And it's been only ever been enforced against pro-lifers to basically make them get away from Planned Parenthood. So those, I think that law should have been struck down, but in Massachusetts, we don't have one of those. If there is just a general noise ordinance, it has to be, reasonable, content neutral. It can't say something like you can't make noise to, you can't make noise if you're talking against abortion or something like that. It has to be content neutral. So typically noise ordinances are not going to be a problem unless you are using like a really loud amplifier or music or something like that. But it definitely can happen. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on, protests and demonstrations. Again, just that reasonable time, place, and manner standard comes into play with these. So cities and towns can require permits for gathering over certain limits, but again, those permits can't be denied based on content, based on viewpoint, basically based on the message of your protest or demonstration. So if they grant permits to other people, they got to grant permits to you as well. They can't not grant you a permit because of the message of your, of your protest. So just check in with like your city hall if you are planning some kind of protest or demonstration outside on the street. You may need to get a pre-approval for that, but they shouldn't raise any more roadblocks for you than they do for anybody else. So those are some First Amendment basics. I'm sure, there's a lot more that we could cover. And if you have any specific questions, I'd love to get to those in the Q&A. Or if you want to reach out to me, confidentially, or if you want to have a further follow-up conversation, my email is right here, sam@malibertylegal.org. So I'm happy to discuss anything further with anybody on this call. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. We have a few questions, but feel free to continue sending them in, and I'll go ahead and read them off. But to start, we have a question that says, I'm interested in how high school groups most often get started by churches, parents, or student self-starters. So Jessica, can you speak to that?
Yeah, no, I would say definitely for high school groups. I would say it's typically kind of depends, but it typically would be probably a parent and their student who's very interested and involved. Obviously, these are Students for Life groups, so we want the students to be the ones who are mainly running the group and putting on their events and things like that. But especially at the high school level, I will say the parents are definitely a lot more involved typically. There are also churches though that want to start Students for Life groups through their youth group or through their pro-life ministry at their church. I actually had a group in New Hampshire reach out to me, a church in New Hampshire reach out to me this past week, and they want to start a Students for Life group through their youth group at their church. So yeah, that's definitely it could definitely be either way, but you definitely want to make sure you have like at least one student or a few students who are interested and involved and want to learn more about the issue. That would be the main thing.
Awesome. And then we have another question that says, regarding free speech, would free speech issues also qualify if it's against the professor directly? I'm at a public university.
So like if you're in class and you're, you know, directly challenging your professor, I assume, or if you're calling out a professor on, you know, a view that they have. So unless you're disrupting class, you know, if you're being rude to your professor or if you're disrupting class in some other way, that probably is not going to be protected speech. But if you are criticizing a professor, whether in class or outside class, in a respectful way that doesn't, you know, disrupt the education that people are getting, yeah, absolutely, you have a free speech right to do that. You know, public officials, that's actually kind of the point of the First Amendment is to protect your right to criticize government officials and to criticize the government in general. It's what our country was founded on, so absolutely.
Great. And then another question that I saw come through in relation to the abortion pill. Do you have a quick summary of how to best explain to women who are considering it the physical dangers to themselves when it comes to the abortion pill?
Yeah, I would say a few things you can hit on is that sometimes when you take the abortion pill, not all of the, and I mentioned this a little bit in my slide, but not all of the fetal remains are like come out of the woman's body. So sometimes there's still parts of the baby that are left in her body, which can cause infection and can be very, very dangerous. Some other dangers of abortion, just in general, is that it actually like increases a woman's chances of getting like cancer, like breast cancer, later in life. And there also, yeah, there have been women who have died from the abortion pill. There's a list of women who have actually bled to death. And I know that another thing is just that I've heard is a lot of women don't realize how much they're going to bleed when they go through with a chemical abortion. Often they're told that it'll just be a heavy period, and then they go home and they take the abortion pill, the chemical abortion pills, and they're bleeding for days on end, which can obviously be incredibly dangerous. So I hope that's helpful.
Just to piggyback on that, I'm not an abortion expert by any means, but one other thing that I've heard is it can lead to the misdiagnosis of ectopic pregnancies, because it won't dislodge an ectopic pregnancy, obviously, and so you might think that you know, got rid of the baby, but you still have a dangerous, you know, ectopic pregnancy, and that can be life-threatening.
Okay, and then one last question for you, Sam, and then we'll wrap up. So this is a personal question. I have heard many stories of friends of mine who have tried to put up posters advertising pro-life events, and they've had those posters torn down. Can you speak directly to that, on a college campus, what responding to that, and a college doing that could look like?
Yeah, so I think it depends on who's tearing them down. If the university, if you can verify that somebody from the university is tearing them down, then that's a free speech lawsuit. You know, and you should contact us and we can send a legal letter to the school and say, you know, stop doing this, you're violating their free speech rights. If it's another student, you know, you can't typically you're not going to go sue them for doing something like that. But obviously, report it to the university and try to get evidence of it. Especially like if you could get maybe bait them into doing it again, get video, and then submit that to the university. And if the university doesn't do anything about it because they're not pro-life, then you can call them out, and you know you can kind of expose them publicly for violating your viewpoint. And actually, that if they're not protecting your free speech rights, and they, like they would other student groups, free speech rights, that actually could be the basis for a lawsuit as well. So I guess what I would say is document it as much as you can, and contact us if you think that your rights might be violated.
Awesome, thank you. Well, Jessica and Sam, I don't know if you want to share your emails one more time before we log off, if anyone wants to share any other questions with you guys. But this whole thing has been recorded, so it will be posted on Massachusetts Family Institute's YouTube if you ever want to go back and reference it, or if you missed something earlier in the presentations that you want to go back to. So we will get that up tomorrow, and you can reference that anytime you want and share it as much as you would like. So looks like those emails are going in the chat. Feel free to grab
Oops.
those. And
Sent one to
yeah,
Jessica. I sent
yeah,
one to Jessica by accident. Here it is.
there you go. And you can absolutely reach out to both of those, Sam and Jessica, with any questions that you may have. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope you have a great evening. And hopefully we'll be in contact with you guys soon.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Mariah.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Right. God bless. Bye.